Next, Mr. Chameleon's Strangest Murder Case. Tonight, we again present the famous Mr. Chameleon of Central Headquarters in his most famous cases of crime and murder. Brought to you by the makers of genuine Bayer aspirin. Now let me tell you just who Mr. Chameleon is. A college man, he tried from childhood to live up to the name he bore, Chameleon, by taking on the color of whatever situation in which he found himself, appearing in endless guises, finally entering the police force, where he became known as Chameleon, the man of many faces, the underworld's most dreaded man. The listener invariably knows who Mr. Chameleon is, no matter which disguise he assumes. But the criminal he's tracking down seldom does. Tonight we give you Mr. Chameleon in Mr. Chameleon's Strangest Murder Case. It is early evening, and in the luxurious duplex apartment of Jim and Polly Towers, Jim is angrily pacing up and down. His face is livid, his voice trembling with rage as he says to the weeping girl on the sofa,
"Tell me the truth, Polly. What was that man doing here? Why was Billy Kellum here in this apartment?"
Jim, dear, please don't let your temper get the best of you.
Then tell me what that shady nightclub hanger-on was doing here.
I told you I knew him when I was singing at the Gilded Lily. After all, dear, all nightclub people aren't shady. I was one before you married me. Oh, Jim, I'm so miserable. I'm so frightened.
Oh, darling, I'm sorry.
Jim, you're quite right. Billy Kellum is a dreadful creature. I thought I'd gotten rid of his kind long ago, but suddenly last month he turned up here at the apartment. He's been telephoning me. He's even been following me on the street. And I don't know what to do about it. I really think the man is mad.
I suppose he's been making love to you.
Yes. Yes, he has. He was a horrible nuisance in the old days, and now it's unbearable.
Polly, why didn't you tell me before?
I was afraid to. But I really think Billy is mad. I cannot get rid of him.
You won't have to get rid of him. That's my job.
Now, many hours later, we find Mr. Chameleon, the famous detective, the man of many disguises, in his own attractive home. But Mr. Chameleon is doing something most unusual for him. At 11 o'clock at night, he is in his bed and sleeping soundly. But not for long, for the telephone beside him shrills out.
Hello?
Oh, hello, Chameleon.
Commissioner, oh, no, not you. This is the first night in 2 months I've gotten to bed before midnight.
I'm sorry, Chameleon, but I've got a nice little job for you. Ever hear of Jim Towers?
The Oklahoma oil man? Who hasn't heard of him? A few years ago he married that lovely girl who was such a nightclub sensation, Polly Newell.
Hey, what a memory.
Well, what about Jim Towers?
Well, there's a man named Billy Kellum.
You mean the nightclub press agent?
That's right. Billy Kellum was found shot to death in the parking space back of the Gilded Lily.
Who shot him?
We don't know. That's why I'm calling you, Chameleon. But less than an hour earlier, Jim Towers was looking for him, flourishing a gun and threatening to kill Kellum. Now, if I were you, Chameleon, I'd take Detective Sergeant Dave Arnold and get over to Jim Towers' apartment immediately.
I'll be over there in 3 minutes.
Mr. Chameleon, it's unthinkable that my husband would kill anyone. Jim Towers is the sweetest man in the world. Everyone will tell you that.
Quite a few already have told me that, Mrs. Towers. One of your husband's friends and the doorman of this apartment house. They agreed that Jim Towers is a wonderful guy with a terrible temper.
But even so, Mr. Chameleon...
Billy Kellum was murdered about 10 o'clock. Where was your husband at that time?
Well, he was out. He stayed downtown on business.
He isn't back yet?
Well, no. Yes. Yes, he came in about 11 and said he didn't feel well. He went to his room. But
what, Mrs. Towers?
he went out again. He said he was too restless to sleep. He said he wanted to take a walk. He'll be back any minute.
What did he have against the murdered man, Billy Kellum?
Oh, nothing.
Why was he looking for him and waving a gun in several night spots earlier this evening?
Well, Billy Kellum used to be my press agent when I was a nightclub singer. But Jim couldn't have threatened him. He had no reason to.
Mrs. Towers, you are lying to protect your husband. Dave?
Yes, Mr. Chameleon.
Bring in Mrs. Towers' maid, please.
What does Ada have to do with it? Ada?
Oh, Mrs. Towers, they asked me and I had to tell them. I told them I heard Mr. Towers saying that he'd kill Mr. Kellum because Mr. Kellum was bothering you.
But you didn't even know about it.
Oh, yes, you did.
The door was open to the kitchen. I couldn't help hearing.
You were eavesdropping.
I heard it, Mrs. Towers. I couldn't help hearing.
Thank you, Ada. Dave, keep an eye on her, please, will you?
Right.
Mrs. Towers, I've got to search your husband's room.
What for, Mr. Chameleon? Why should you search Jim's room? You won't find anything in here.
Nevertheless, I would like to search it. This the clothes closet?
Mr. Chameleon, my husband hasn't committed any crime. I love him. I know him. He couldn't be guilty of murder.
What's this? Sort of shoebox?
Mr. Chameleon, listen to me. If Jim was jealous and hot-tempered, it was only because he loved me so much. You must believe me.
Mrs. Towers, is this your husband's gun?
Yes, I guess so.
Polly? Oh, Polly!
Oh, here's Jim now.
Polly, I just couldn't... Who's this?
Jim! Oh, sweetheart.
Who's this man?
My name is Chameleon, Mr. Towers. I'm a detective from Central Headquarters.
Detective? You're the famous Chameleon? What are you doing here? What are you doing with my gun?
Oh, Jim. Jim, Billy Kellum's been murdered.
Murdered?
Yes, Mr. Towers, and the bullet that killed him came from a Colt 45. Like this gun of yours. I see there is one cartridge missing.
Jim, he thinks you killed Billy Kellum.
I didn't kill him, Mr. Chameleon. I didn't even see Billy tonight. Polly, I'm innocent. You must believe me, I'm innocent.
I repeat, the bullet that killed Kellum was from a 45 Colt, a popular weapon in Oklahoma, I'm told, and you, Mr. Towers, come from Oklahoma. The whole picture doesn't look very good for you.
I tell you, I didn't do it.
That remains to be seen, Mr. Towers. For your sake, I hope you didn't do it. Anyway, Detective Sergeant Arnold and I will see you and Mrs. Towers later. Dave, come along. Let's be on our way.
Right, Mr. Chameleon. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Dave, what do you think about this affair?
Oh, it looks like Jim Towers did it all right. It's too bad. The wife of his Polly is sure a peach, Mr. Chameleon. If I could find a gal like that, I'd get married tomorrow.
Before she married Jim Towers, she was a nightclub singer, the toast of the town.
Sure a tough break for the kid. What you said to Towers was right, though, Mr. Chameleon. The case certainly looks black for him.
Black, you say, Dave? Well, that gives me an idea. First thing tomorrow, I'm going to question some of the murdered man's friends.
And Mr. Chameleon does find the murdered man's girlfriend. We hear him say,
So, Daisy O'Malley, you were Billy Kellum's girlfriend, eh?
Listen, Mr. Chameleon, you're a smart cop. I know lots of guys that are scared to death of you. Maybe they're right. But what the devil makes you think I was Billy Kellum's girl?
Weren't you, Miss O'Malley?
Call me Daisy. Dainty Daisy, the dancing doll. And I had a darn sight better act than Polly Towers did, too. She just stood there looking pretty and chirping a few high notes. And what happens? She married Jim Towers, a millionaire Oklahoma oil man.
So you're jealous of Polly Towers, huh?
I was not jealous of her. She may have got Jim Towers, but I had Billy Kellum, and that was good enough. Oh.
That's all right, Daisy. I was pretty sure you were Billy's girl. Did you kill him?
Huh?
He was shot in the dark in a parking lot back of that nightclub, the Gilded Lily. No one saw it happen. It might have been anyone. Even you.
Mr. Chameleon, are you nuts?
You were jealous of Polly Towers, and Billy Kellum was still in love with her.
In love with her? He couldn't stand Polly Towers. He told me he couldn't stand her.
Is that why he was always bothering her? Always trying to see her?
He had to see her. He was shaking her down for something.
I'll bet.
Yes, he was. He had something on Polly Towers. I don't know what it was, but he was trying to get money out of her.
Daisy, you're kidding yourself. What could he have on her, the lovely Polly, the lovely Mrs. Jim Towers?
I don't know, Mr. Chameleon, but maybe it had something to do with Jack.
Who?
Jack Burton. A serious type guy who was crazy in love with Polly.
You mean Jack Burton, the newspaper man?
Yeah, sure. Why don't you look him up instead of pestering me? Trying to make me think my Billy wasn't in love with me.
You may have an idea there, Daisy. I think I'll look in on Jack Burton and have a little chat. My name is Chameleon, and this is Detective Sergeant Arnold.
Chameleon, the famous detective? Sure, I know you. You're famous for disguises.
You must read the newspapers you work for, Mr. Burton. I understand you're a rewrite man.
That's right.
We're here in connection with the murder of Billy Kellum. We want to talk to you about Polly Towers.
Polly?
That's right.
I've been told you're in love with Polly Towers. Well?
Mr. Chameleon, I'm not in the habit of discussing my emotions with the police or anyone else.
This is a case of murder, Mr. Burton. Polly's husband, Jim Towers, is being held for the shooting of Billy Kellum.
I know that.
Would you be pleased if Jim Towers were out of the picture? If Jim Towers were convicted, that would leave the field open for you with Polly, wouldn't it?
Just what do you think I am?
A man who's in love with a very lovely girl.
Yes, Polly Towers is lovely and fine and good. But what could I give her? Nothing at all. But let me tell you something. I'm glad that Billy Kellum is dead. I'd be glad to kill anyone who tried to hurt Polly.
Oh, you would, huh? Did you hear that, Mr. Chameleon?
I did, Dave.
But that doesn't mean I did. And now, excuse me, the paper's almost ready to go to press. And don't worry, Chameleon. I'll be right here in this newspaper office in case you want me. Goodbye.
So, Mr. Chameleon, this guy Jack Burton would be willing to kill anyone who tried to hurt Polly Towers.
Yes, so he says. Well, Dave, does it all look quite so simple now?
Simple. Mr. Chameleon, there are wheels within wheels within wheels.
Exactly. And I have a feeling before this mystery of Billy Kellum's murder is finally solved, it may be the strangest I've ever handled. And in its way, one of the most horrible.
Mr. Chameleon's strangest murder case continues in just a moment. When you're suffering from an ordinary headache, neuritic, or neuralgic pain, you want two things. First, you want something that will give you fast relief. And second, you want something that will give you dependable relief. So listen. People everywhere know that because it's actually ready to go to work in 2 seconds, Bayer aspirin provides fast relief. And they know that because it's gentle to the system, it also provides dependable relief. The fact is that Bayer aspirin has been used by millions of normal people without ill effect, a record no other pain reliever can match. And that means that of all pain relievers, Bayer aspirin is one you can take with complete confidence. So when you have a headache, don't experiment with drugs that have not been proved by years of successful use. For the two most important kinds of relief, the fast relief you want and the dependable relief you need, do as millions do. Be sure with Bayer aspirin. When you buy, ask for it by its full name, Bayer aspirin, not just for aspirin alone. Get the 100-tablet bottle and you get Bayer aspirin tablets for less than a penny apiece. And now, back to Mr. Chameleon's strangest murder case. It is some time later, and in the office of the Commissioner of Police, the Commissioner is frowning intently at Chameleon. And Detective Sergeant Dave Arnold, too, looks puzzled and disturbed as he says,
But what do you expect to accomplish, Mr. Chameleon? Hasn't Polly Towers gone through enough without putting her through more unpleasantness and trouble?
Dave, her husband, is being held for murder. The circumstantial evidence is all against him. The maid's testimony is looking for Kellum that night of the murder. The fact the fatal bullet came from a .45 like his.
Only it might not have been his gun, Chameleon. Our ballistics experts can't say positively.
Well, that's it, Commissioner. There are other .45s, plenty of them. No one saw the actual shooting. Might have been Jack Burton. It might have been Daisy O'Malley. Who knows? But I intend to find out.
But what will we gain by hounding Polly Towers?
Why, Dave, I didn't realize Sir Galahad had joined the police force.
Oh, me? Hey, listen, I'm as hard as nails.
Yes. Billy Kellum's killer is as hard as nails, too. But really hard. And, Dave, I propose that we get them. That's why I'm going to pose as Billy Kellum's partner. Partner in blackmailing.
Blackmailing? You're going to go in disguise and pose as a blackmailer?
That's the idea, Dave. Didn't Daisy O'Malley say that the murdered man, Billy Kellum, might have been blackmailing Polly Towers about Jack Burton?
Yeah, so she did.
Well, in my disguise as a blackmailer, I'll take the name of Ludovic. Ludovic. One of those creatures who crawl out of the woodwork.
And you think that Polly Towers will turn to Jack Burton when you start your blackmail act on her?
Yes, possibly. Her husband is jail. She has no one else to turn to. Also, I'll see to it that Daisy O'Malley finds out that this Ludovic's making the rounds, claiming he has absolute evidence against the killer.
Oh, so that's your game.
Mm-hmm. That's my game, Commissioner. That's what I'll tell Polly Towers when I manage to get in to see her as Lou Ludovic, which may take quite a lot of time. Also, I hope will lead me somewhere.
And Mr. Chameleon is quite right. It does take a lot of time for the oily Lou Ludovic to get to see Mrs. Polly Towers. But we find Chameleon now in his disguise as Lou Ludovic. Slick back hair, pinstriped suit, gray fedora hat, saying to Polly's maid, Ada,
Please, just tell Mrs. Towers that Mr. Ludovic is here. I'm sure she will see me.
Well, I know she won't. And if you don't stop bothering us, we'll call the police.
The police? I do not fear the police. I am here as a friend.
You're no friend of Mrs. Towers. Well, she says she never heard of you.
She has heard of Billy Kellum.
And you're just as bad as he was. You act just like he did.
Billy was persistent, so am I. Mrs. Towers might better see me and get it over with.
Listen, you. Mrs. Towers has had enough trouble.
It's all right, Ada. Oh. Let him in. Maybe he's right. I might just as well see him and get it over with.
Mrs. Towers, this is a great pleasure. I have long wanted to meet you. I am sure Billy Kellum spoke of me.
You're mistaken. He never mentioned you. Come into the living room. Ada, you can go.
Yes, Mrs. Towers. But if you need me...
I'm not afraid. And please close the kitchen door.
Yes, Mum.
Now, Mr. Ludovic, what can I do for you?
As Daisy O'Malley would say, please call me Lou. Though Daisy would say, please call me Daisy, wouldn't she?
Who is Daisy O'Malley? What has she got to do with this?
She was a friend of Billy Kellum's, too, just as I am, Mrs. Towers. Now admit that he must have mentioned me.
I don't think you quite understand. Mr. Kellum never discussed anyone. He made my life miserable with his personal interest in me.
Who can blame him? You're even more beautiful than he said.
But he never spoke of you, Mr. Ludovic. Never, at any time.
He did not tell you I was his partner? His partner in his blackmailing activities? That it was I who got the goods on you and Jack Burton?
Blackmail? Are you crazy? Billy never blackmailed me. And Jack Burton, why, Jack and I were simply good friends. How could you get the goods on us? I don't know what you mean.
Don't you, Mrs. Towers?
No. Billy never blackmailed me. He thought he was in love with me, that was all.
Is it possible that I could be mistaken?
You certainly are mistaken. And now, Mr. Ludovic, get out of my house.
Very well, I'm mistaken. It was a shot in the dark. But, Mrs. Towers, I am not mistaken when I say I have evidence that will convict Billy Kellum's murderer.
What? You mean you have evidence against my husband?
Draw your own conclusions.
No, I don't believe you. This is a trick of some kind. You couldn't have evidence. You couldn't possibly.
Do you wish to take a chance on that? Do you, Mrs. Towers?
What is the evidence?
You think I am Santa Claus? It'll cost you $1,000 to know and for me to keep my mouth shut.
I don't believe you. It's a trick.
I wouldn't take a chance on that. In fact, if I were you, I would bring $1,000 to my rooming house down on Sullivan Street. I will give you the number. You simply walk in. My room is on the ground floor, the first door to the right. I would be there tonight at 8 o'clock if I were you, Mrs. Towers.
this is a charming little rat hole, eh, Mr. Chameleon?
Yes, Dave. Just the kind of place where Lou Ludovic would conduct his business. He'd live at a swanky uptown hotel, I'm sure, but this is the sort of hole.
Where he'd blackmail helpless women.
Dave, I expect to trap the killer tonight. Did you tell the landlady we want no one to disturb us for a while?
And I paid her plenty. And the poor guy who really rents this room, too. Hey, Mr. Chameleon, are you really going to stand with your back to the window so someone from the street could take a shot at you?
I've got to, Dave.
Well, at least a couple of plainclothesmen outside will grab him quick.
Well, I'm not worried.
Well, you should be. A shot in the back.
No, I'm not worried. Just you get behind that curtain when she comes.
If she comes.
But no if about it, my friend. Who's there?
Mr. Ludovic?
Okay, Dave. Behind the curtain.
Is that you, Mrs. Towers?
Yes.
Well, come in. Welcome to my humble abode, Mrs. Towers. A poor thing but mine own, as your Mr. Shakespeare would say.
Mr. Ludovic.
You, still will not call me Lou?
Mr. Ludovic, I only came here to tell you I don't believe you. You have no evidence that my husband murdered Billy Kellum.
I have evidence which will convict the killer, Mrs. Towers. Will you pardon me for not turning on more light, my dear? The shade is broken and I feel better without too much light on.
Mr. Ludovic, you're lying. You have no evidence. I know your kind. The Gilded Lily, where I once worked, was crawling with them. That's why it was so wonderful to get out of that awful atmosphere.
Come to the point, please. I have the evidence. Give me the $1,000. I know you brought it with you.
No, I didn't.
Of course you did. What's $1,000 to you, Mrs. Polly Towers? Jim Towers is very, very rich man. Give me the money.
All right. I couldn't take the chance. Though I still don't believe you have any evidence.
Give me the money.
The only thing is, Mr. Ludovic, this won't be the end. If I give you this, you'll keep on asking me for more.
Mrs. Towers, you will have to take a chance on that, too. The money, please.
I have it here in my purse.
What's the matter?
Mr. Ludovic, there's someone outside on the street, watching us through the window.
No.
Yes, there is. They're standing quite close to the window.
Is it a man or a woman?
Why don't you look for yourself? Oh, no! They have a gun. They're raising it to shoot. They're going to kill you.
Kill me?
Yes, you cheap blackmailer. Only I'm the one that's going to kill you. Let go my wrist.
Did you think that I'd really turn my back on you, Polly Towers? Do you think I wasn't prepared to have you pull a knife on me or shoot me in the back? Though a knife was smarter this time.
Let go of me. You're not Lou Ludovic. You're Mr. Chameleon.
Quite right, Mrs. Towers, and I'm arresting you for the murder of Billy Kellum. Dave.
Yes, Mr. Chameleon. Don't tell me it's Mrs. Towers.
Frightfully sorry to disillusion you, Dave. I couldn't bear to do it till the last minute. But I'm going to need help to get this little wildcat down to a cell in Central Headquarters. Sit down, Mr. Burton.
Mr. Chameleon,
I wanted you present during our little talk with Polly Towers. I want you to understand what sort of a woman you've been involved with and how easily you yourself could have been charged with being an accomplice to murder.
What?
Jack, don't listen to him. If I pulled a knife on Chameleon, it's because I thought he was a dreadful creature like Billy Kellum.
Now, Mrs. Towers, you worked out a clever plot for the killing of two men you wanted out of your life.
I'll not listen to you.
First, you murdered the blackmailer, Billy Kellum, and then you tried to have your husband pay the death penalty for a murder that you committed.
I didn't.
You planted your husband's gun, the gun you used to kill Kellum, where I couldn't fail to find it, in your husband's room. And you left the kitchen door open so that your maid, Ada, couldn't fail to hear your husband's threats against Billy Kellum.
That's a lie.
And you knew that maid would tell me, and I'd be hot on the trail of your husband with deadly evidence against him.
Dream on, Chameleon.
But what you didn't know was that the doorman of your building told me that you left and returned to the building in exactly the time you needed to kill Billy Kellum. He was murdered about 10:15. That is when you were out.
But I had no reason to murder Billy Kellum. My husband was jealous of him. I
See, there it is. You're trying to plant it on your husband again. Now, I'll tell you why you killed Billy Kellum, Polly. You've been paying him hush money for months. Your bank has a record of the checks, and I have the canceled checks. $500 every month.
Stop it! Stop it!
This was your way to silence the blackmailing Kellum. Your way to get rid of your husband, so that you could marry Jack Burton here.
Listen, Chameleon, I've had nothing to do with this.
You've been seeing her without her husband's knowledge, haven't you, Burton?
Yes, I loved her.
And I love you, Jack. In all my life, you're the only person I've ever loved. But I couldn't live on your salary, you know that. I needed Jim's money.
Polly.
With Jim out of the way, we could both use his money. I did it for you as well as myself. I did it for both of us. Jack, look at me.
Polly, I can't believe this. That you did.
No, she did, Burton. And supplied me with one of the strangest murder cases of my career. An extraordinary way to get rid of a husband. She killed Kellum and then expected the state to kill her husband for her. A diabolical pattern in criminal psychology.
Jack, take me out of here.
Nobody will ever take you out of here, Polly. Dave, lead this woman to her cell, please.
Come along, Mrs. Towers.
No! Jack!
I hope, Chameleon, that you're really convinced I knew nothing of this terrible thing.
If I weren't, Burton, you would be out of luck. You see that motto of my desk? Read it. You'll know why both you and Jim Towers walk out of here free men.
Oh, I see. The innocent must be protected. The guilty must be punished.
And I don't mind telling you, Burton, that all my sympathies are with Jim Towers.
And with these words, Mr. Chameleon concludes tonight's murder case. One reason why millions use Bayer aspirin to relieve ordinary headaches is that Bayer aspirin means amazingly fast relief. And its astonishing ability to be ready to go to work in 2 seconds is something you can prove right in your own home. To find out how quickly Bayer aspirin is ready to go to work, all you need do is clock its disintegrating speed. Simply drop the tablet in a glass of water. What happens in the glass happens in your stomach. And as you'll see with your own eyes when you make this test, Bayer aspirin starts disintegrating almost instantly. And this 2-second action is why Bayer aspirin brings you such quick pain relief. So to relieve a headache fast, use something you can actually prove works with remarkable speed, genuine Bayer aspirin. And when you buy, ask for it by name, Bayer aspirin, not just for aspirin alone. Get the 100-tablet bottle and you get Bayer aspirin tablets for less than a penny apiece. Listen next Wednesday night at this same time for Mr. Chameleon, the man of many faces in The Woman's Weapon Murder Case. The part of Mr. Chameleon is played by Karl Swenson with dialogue by Marie Baumer from the original story by Frank and Anne Hummert. Music directed by Victor Arden. Your announcer is Howard Claney.
After years of work, a revolutionary new toothpaste has been developed called Lion's Toothpaste. By actual laboratory test on scores of individual teeth, it gets teeth 2.5 to 5.5 times brighter than any of the 5 leading brands. Brighter by far than any other toothpaste. New Lion's Toothpaste does this because it's a new kind of toothpaste with a formula that's completely new and radically different. A remarkable toothpaste that cleans without soap and polishes without chalk. Try it. Ask for Lion's Toothpaste.
Listen for Mr. Chameleon in The Woman's Weapon Murder Case next Wednesday night at this time. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.